Is it just for the lucky few? Or is it for everyone? Maybe even you.
Our challenge is in front of us, and we've only begun.
Burton 10 Spaceship One was the first to grab the headlines.
60% of the U.S. public want a chance to fly into space. You can dream, you can dare, you can take risks. Make your dreams come true.
But now the real adventure begins, because hundreds of people are making plans, making rockets, and blasting off into the thin air. We're going to meet these brilliant and inspiring people who aren't afraid to strap themselves in and light the fuse. We'll find out what makes them tick and why they've set their sights so high. And we'll talk to the experts to see if they're just space cadets or true space chasers.
My dream?
Our dream has always been
Going to the moon. Colonizing Mars.
vacationing in space.
The fun frontier. I always wanted to experience total weightlessness. G-force. I want to float up there in space. I want to fly.
He's gonna build a spacecraft.
A rocket. A shuttle. I don't have any money. I've got $20 million. 2 prototypes. I've got a team of technicians.
They're friends of his.
I'm going to the moon. Mars. I'm the space chaser. We are space chasers.
He's either really brave or really crazy. Maybe both.
Houston, we have a dream.
Meet Brian Walker. His personal space program has the perfect combination of unlimited ambition and zero bureaucracy. Brian is an inventor and entrepreneur who all alone has built his own submarine, hovercraft, and made millions of bucks creating cool-selling toys like the Light Chaser, Air Bazooka, and the Wind Gyrotop.
A lot of people ask me, well, why do you want to build this rocket? What do you want to do? Why do you want to go into space? I grew up in the 60s when the space program was just beginning. Most of the original astronauts, the Mercury 7, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walking on the moon. These guys they're people that I always respected. But somewhere around 8 or 9 years old, I concluded that I wasn't going to be selected. So I figured that if I was ever going to make it into space, I'd have to do it on my own. So I decided I wanted to build this rocket and try and be the first person to go up to touch the edge of space.
What kind of guy builds a rocket in his backyard?
This I gotta see.
This was my test rocket, and this was designed to carry me up to about 15,000 feet in the upper section where the capsule is, and then I was going to skydive from it while this came down under its own parachute. It has never been done before where a private citizen launched vertically in a private rocket. The moment the engine was initiated, the clamps holding the rocket down would release, allowing the air pressure to come into play. That provided a 2,000-pound boost. Then you accelerate for the 14 or 15 seconds of fuel, and then it coasts.
I see why he calls himself Rocket Guy.
Now, inside the capsule, I would be standing, but I wouldn't be standing on my legs because if I was standing in there, the launch G's would cause me to crumple. So I'd be wearing a regular skydiving rig, and then I would be suspended from a harness that was attached at the very top of the nose cone. And once the rocket launched, then the door had 2 handles on it. And as I pushed those handles forward, it would release the harness and the door catch, and I would simply just come right out like that. The moment I left this, I was no different than any skydiver jumping out of any airplane.
This is way beyond
Bungee jumping.
And the fins need to be really large if you want to have a good, stable airflow stability. So at launch, there was a secondary fin that fit in that upper groove that came out, and it actually made each fin almost 3 times its size that it is now. So these sections were held in place with a strap and a ripcord style pin. So once I reached about 100 miles an hour, that pin would pull and those overlay fins, they would pop off of here. So then I would be trimmed down to the correct fin size for the rest of the duration of the flight. This was an easier goal to attain initially than the full-on goal of going 50 miles in the much bigger rocket. Some people think I'm a nut. I take that as a compliment.
Since he was a kid, Brian Walker has dreamed of going into space. He has spent over $1 million of his own money to build the ultimate thrill ride, a spaceship.
How's he gonna breathe up there?
So I actually purchased a spacesuit in Russia. Got a real good deal for $15,000. The important thing about the spacesuit is there's an absence of air, it's a vacuum. If there was a sudden loss of cabin pressure, basically everything you see in the sci-fi movies would happen. Your eyes would bulge out of your head, your blood would boil, and you'd die within seconds.
Must be hard for this guy to get life insurance.
This provides a complete atmosphere around me, so in the event that I was suddenly exposed to a vacuum, inside here I'm protected.
At least he looks like an astronaut.
When I accelerate in this rocket, I'm going to be pressed into my seat with a lot of G's, and I want to know that if I have to respond to an emergency situation, that I can do that. So I felt it was important to have a centrifuge of my own. My centrifuge is like any other centrifuge. It's a spinning arm that at one end there has a capsule you sit in. Instead of powering the arm with gears and powering it at the shaft, I just put a little ultralight engine on the other end. That centrifuge, I've managed to get it up to 9 Gs. That's as fast as I can get it going, and that's as much G's as I've been able to have it produce, which is plenty, because I won't experience any more than that on my flight. Important thing is being able to take the G's for an extended period of time. For instance, I may only experience 6 G's, but those 6 G's may last for a minute, and reaching 6 G's for 10 seconds and reaching 6 G's for a minute are two different things.
Brian, what is your IQ?
What if he starts spinning out of control?
Also, if I get into a situation where I'm tumbling and rolling, I needed to get adapted to not becoming nauseous and experience vertigo from the tumbling action. So I built the MAD machine, and of course MAD is multi-axis disorientation.
That looks like a torture device.
It allows you to tumble in all different directions randomly. And the idea there, of course, is that when you do it the first time versus the 50th time, the first time you get off of it and you're wobbly and you don't feel so well because of the vertigo and the nausea associated with it. The 50th time you get off of it, you don't feel anything because your brain begins to make adjustments for your equilibrium distribution. It's just like an aerobatic pilot that has been flying for years. They develop the ability to not get sick from tumbling. Along with that, I've been doing skydiving, and I bought an ultralight just to get used to being in the air and controlling things and dealing with changing atmospheric conditions. So I've tried to mirror as much as possible the same training that American astronauts and Russian cosmonauts have gone through.
How can you get up there without those big rockets like NASA uses?
A lot of the
movies I saw as a child, science fiction movies like From the Earth to the Moon, First Man on the Moon. There was another movie in the 50s called When Worlds Collide. They had a giant rail that went down a hill and then up a mountainside, and the rocket actually rode a sled. So they actually launched and accelerated this rocket without having to use its own onboard fuel. And even at a very early age, to me, that made the ultimate amount of sense.
What did the experts think of all this?
Some of these coincidences aren't necessarily coincidental. For example, launching from the east coast of Florida will send the spacecraft at an eastbound trajectory using the Earth's rotation to help slingshot the spacecraft into space. And also, if something goes wrong, you end up in the Atlantic Ocean instead of crashing into a population center. So there are a lot of guesses that science fiction authors make, which fall in line with what scientists and engineers do as well.
Science fiction exists because when science fiction writers write their fiction, somebody buys it. That is, science fiction writers have touched on something in the human spirit that gets us.
I'm looking to do something now that's a little bit more in line with what I see as the future, and that is catapult-launched vehicles. The concept of a catapult rocket is I see as very basic. For instance, an aircraft carrier uses a catapult to launch airplanes because it has to, because the airplane could never accelerate fast enough on its own to get off the aircraft carrier. The idea of giving the energy to the rocket from a ground-based device is logical because it's cheap energy when you're not having to carry it on board. The space shuttle has a burn time of about 10 minutes, and yet it burns half of its fuel in the first minute.
Talk about bad gas mileage.
Space shuttle, and you can accelerate it on a ground-based acceleration device like a catapult to the same speed that is traveling when it's burned half of its fuel. You could actually use half the amount of fuel required because it's already reached that speed before it's even used its engines. And since you didn't have to carry that amount of fuel in the first place, you'd actually have to take less than half because you weren't carrying that weight with you. Typical price per pound to orbit is something in the neighborhood of $10,000 a pound.
Ah, the $20,000 paperweight.
The magic number that people have been talking about for years is when you can get the price down to $1,000 a pound, that's when things are going to be exciting. And yet I look at that and I just shake my head and just say, well, that's, for me, we're still talking close to $200,000, and that's just unreasonable. How about more like $10 or $15 a pound? That's reasonable, and I think that's doable.
As we advance the technologies, the cost will actually come down, the safety will go up. The truth is, even for the next 50 years, it is going to be expensive to go off-world, but that makes it part of the unique experience that is so valuable, so interesting, so unique, almost exclusive. Our job, though, is over the next number of decades to advance the technologies to the point where more people can go.
You have to start with a clean sheet of paper. You have to forget about rockets and the way it's been done. And you have to look at it from a different perspective. Not as a rocket, but simply as a projectile.
Did he say catapult?
This I gotta see.
This is the catapult that's going to be launching the space plane. And basically there's a rail here, there's a truck up there that rides on wheels. That's what the rocket sits on. And then there'll be a 30-foot fiberglass bow on the front, making this a giant crossbow. So the cable, or the winch here, will pull that back to cock the bow. You load the aircraft on it, then you raise this up, and this gives it enough momentum that when it comes off of here, it's immediately aerodynamically stable, and it has a whole lot of momentum behind it, so it gives it a greater distance, and is a big safety factor because I'm not starting out on its own power. It's being actually hurled into the air, much like an aircraft carrier launches airplanes off the deck.
When you think about it, NASA will spend more money on their Christmas party than I spend on my entire project.
Brian has trained for spaceflight. He has built a vertical rocket which he has scrapped for a better idea. He's preparing for his final mission to blast off.
The off-the-shelf technology, OTS technology I'm using for this, means basically I am buying stuff that already exists, as far as at least the main components, and applying it to my needs. These pulse jets, for instance, were built in 1951 for military drones for target practice. I found the pulse jets on the internet, for sale on the internet, and bought 2 of them. Basically, it's a pipe that has a series of reed valves in the nose, and when you ignite them, you turn on the fuel, you blast air into the front, and you hit the spark, and there's an explosion that takes place. This cycle happens over and over again, and it happens at a rate of about 80 to 100 times a second. And so that's why it's called a pulse jet, because it's pulsing. There's nothing really in here that's exotic. There's nothing that's had to have been created that's never been done before. It's all pretty much using existing technology. And of course, when it comes to the catapult, some of this is very ancient technology.
What's he using for fuel?
Regular unleaded?
If you've ever gone shopping for rocket fuel, you might find yourself out of luck. Brian has built a distilling factory and is brewing his own juice for blastoff.
This is my fuel distillation facility, the FDF, and the purpose here is to take non-propulsion grade peroxide, 50%, and to distill it and concentrate it to produce 90% rocket grade propulsion peroxide. In here we have the boiling peroxide. So what happens is I take the water out of the peroxide by condensing it into here. And what's left here is the concentrated peroxide. Once it gets to a certain level, I'll test it with a hydrometer to find the density, then I'll know when it's 90%. 92% peroxide is good for rocket fuel. Anything over that becomes a little bit too dangerous to handle. These are the rocket motors that I was going to be using the rockets. This is a 2,500 pound thrust motor. And as you can see, it is stainless steel and it has an injector plate. These screens are stainless steel plated in silver and they're packed in here real tight. This whole stack is about 200 screens. The injector plate goes on top and then this is where the fuel comes in. When the valves open up, peroxide comes in, massive reaction, 2,500 pounds of thrust. This thing glows red as it produces the steam.
Is this guy for real?
The Slingshot Viper was off-the-shelf technology, something that I could do on a much lower budget than I had originally planned on the first rocket, and something that was going to encompass all of the ideas that I have that I haven't seen done before. The rocket itself is shaped like an airplane and it has wings and everything like an airplane, but it doesn't really fly per se.
How's he planning on getting down?
It's designed to use those airfoil surfaces to give it its stability and its direction and its control, but I would never attempt a landing with it because it's not designed to have that kind of precise flight control. There will be 2 small turbine engines inside. It's using jets. This will be catapulted with the engines firing, and it'll basically go at about an 80-degree angle in order to compensate for the diminishing air, because as the higher you get, obviously, the atmosphere gets thinner. I'll have a nitrous oxide bottle, I will be injecting nitrous oxide into the turbine engines to continue to support combustion. And then when it's time to land, I will deploy a rocket deploy parachute and it will come down and land on the parachute.
Are you really gonna ride the paper airplane?
Then the first step is to spool up the 2 turbines inside. Once the turbines are running at full speed, then you fire the pulse rockets.
By the time I leave the 32-foot launch rail, I should be traveling about 40 miles an hour at that point. So I'll immediately have stability and the ability to maintain control. And it's going to continue upwards at a 80-degree angle, shut down the pulse jets. The initial momentum I have gained will slowly begin to diminish until I reach the apogee of the flight. You get to that point where you can see the Earth's curve, you can see the thin blue line where the atmosphere is, and then above you is the black of space. That is a pretty thrilling thing to experience.
The Viper spaceplane will glide into suborbital space for approximately 8 minutes before gravity pulls it back to Earth.
Space isn't just for astronauts anymore.
One of the things I love to do in my spare time and just on my own is go speak at schools. And so I'm hoping at some point in time there will be people that go on to do much greater things than me who can look back and say, yeah, Rocket Guy was an inspiration to me when I was a kid. To me, the thing I like to remember foremost is that I didn't let little things slow me down. I didn't listen to people telling me I couldn't do it. And I just went out there and did it.
Gentlemen, start your rockets.
Space, it's out there waiting. And more, it's waiting for everyone. Meet more of the fun and fascinating people who are chasing the dream on the next Space Chasers.